All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Haley Weinstein. I am the Communications Associate for the Clean Coalition. We are excited today to host this webinar on how community microgrids are revolutionizing energy resilience and sustainability across diverse regions, from California to Hawaii, all the way to Ann Arbor, Michigan. To start, here are a few housekeeping items. First off, the webinar recording and slides will be sent to all registered attendees within 2 business days. In addition to that, all of our webinars are archived on clean-coalition.org under events. If at any point during the webinar you have any questions, can you see that screen? If you have any questions during the webinar, please do type them in on the questions pane on the right side of your screen, and we will get to answering them at the Q&A portion at the end. And if you have any additional questions about the Clean Coalition or anything else, please feel free to contact me. That's Haley, Haley, at clean-coalition.org. Okay. So before we get into our presentation, I want to set the stage for today's webinar. First, I'll cover who the Clean Coalition is and what we are about. The Clean Coalition is a very technical nonprofit organization, and our mission is to accelerate the transition to renewable energy and a modern grid through technical policy and project development expertise. Our endgame vision is to get to 100% renewable energy. We are focused on getting at least 25% of that endgame from local renewable energy sources. Local means that you are interconnected within the distribution grid where people live and work, and you are facilitating resilience, which is possible because you're avoiding dependence on long-distance transmission lines. To see some great examples of community microgrids which are enabling resilience, I would like to now introduce our speakers. We have 4 excellent presenters today, starting with Craig Lewis. Craig Lewis is the founder and executive director of the Clean Coalition. Craig has over 30 years of experience in the renewables, wireless, semiconductor, and banking industries. Previously VP of Government Relations at Greenvolts, he was the first to successfully navigate a solar project through California's Renewable Portfolio Standard Solicitation process. Craig was energy policy lead on Steve Wesley's 2006 California gubernatorial campaign, and his resume includes senior government relations, corporate development, and marketing positions at leading wireless, semiconductor, and banking companies. Craig received an MBA and MSEE from the University of Southern California and a BSEE from the University of California, Berkeley. Following Craig Lewis, we have Ben Schwartz. Ben Schwartz is the policy manager here at Clean Coalition. Ben represents the Clean Coalition in proceedings at the CPUC, focusing on microgrids, interconnection, net energy metering, renewable procurement, rate design, and more. Ben is passionate about helping humanity solve the 3 greatest crises that exist today: climate change, water scarcity, and the lack of clean energy. Ben holds a BA in History of Public Policy and Environmental Studies from UC Santa Barbara. Our next presenter today is Tim Hade. Tim Hade is the co-founder of Scale Microgrids, and he moved to Santa Barbara with a $100 million funding allocation to bring solar microgrids to the Santa Barbara region. Scale Microgrids focuses on developing sustainable distributed generation technologies to serve mission-critical facilities. Prior to co-founding Scale, Tim served as the business development manager at Energy Redox, where he oversaw development of the company's microgrid projects and built the company's performance contracting division. In 2015, Tim's white paper, Sustainable Load Balancing, Integrating Distributed Natural Gas, Solar PV, and Energy Storage Assets, was named to the 2015 Renewable Energy World Paper of the Year. Prior to joining the clean tech industry, Tim served on active duty as an officer in the U.S. Air Force. He holds a BS from the U.S. Air Force Academy and an MBA from Stanford University. And finally, our last speaker today will be Dr. Missy Stults. Missy Stults is the Director of Sustainability and Innovations of the City of Ann Arbor, Michigan. She works with all city operations, residents, businesses, the University of Michigan, nonprofits, and others to make Ann Arbor one of the most sustainable and equitable cities in America. Prior to joining the city, Missy worked with local governments and indigenous communities around the nation to advance their climate and sustainability goals. Missy has a PhD in urban resilience from the University of Michigan, a master's in climate and society from Columbia University, and undergraduate degrees in marine biology and environmental science from the University of New England. So now, without further ado, I will pass the baton on to Craig to share his screen and begin this portion of the presentation. Gregory.
So let me just make sure that, okay, either show my screen. Just tell me when you see my presentation.
We can see it. You're good. Good to go, Craig.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Haley. And it's a real pleasure to be here with Tim and Missy. I've known Tim for a long time, and I'm just getting to know Missy, and thrilled by the work that both of them are doing. And so pleased to share the floor with them, so to speak, and make sure that their projects and initiatives are getting out there to the world. I'm going to be talking about the Community Microgrid Initiative, and I'm going to be talking really fast because I have about 20 slides and I'm going to be covering them in about 10 minutes. So the good news is that all of my slides are going to be available in the downloads that Haley mentioned she'll be sending around. So I think everybody's content today will be available for download post webinar, and mine 100% for sure will be. So the Community Microgrid Initiative is an initiative that the Clean Coalition established 15 years ago in 2010. And we had sat down and really looked at how do we optimize this trifecta of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits for communities. And the way to do it is to bring the local solar and other distributed energy resources to within those communities, within the distribution grid. And community microgrids come in all sorts of configurations and all sorts of names even, and you'll hear about, a variety of names today. But the one thing that's constant is that they serve multiple customers and they utilize the existing distribution grid. The picture of what we're looking at here is one of the configurations that the Clean Coalition has been working on. This is a 8-story condominium complex, 100% electric, grid optimal, will never pull any energy off the grid on a net basis because a lot of the assets are front of meter. But on a net basis, this building will never pull energy off the grid between 4 and 9 p.m. on a daily basis. And then there is community microgrid resilience. So this entire building will be able to stay on almost indefinitely just by the solar and the storage. So in order to really, understand what a community microgrid is, we need to start by making sure that we, have a definition for it. And I'm going to start with just the definition of a microgrid in general. And a microgrid is a combination of energy resources, definitely including generation, that are coordinated to serve specified loads, including in an islanded fashion. A solar microgrid is a behind-the-meter microgrid that solely relies on solar for the energy generation when islanded. And a solar microgrid also has to rely on energy storage to make sure that the solar can be time shifted to ensure energy availability across a 24/7, 365 basis. A hybrid solar microgrid is a solar microgrid that includes additional sources of energy generation. And a community microgrid, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is a microgrid that covers a target grid area and relies on existing distribution feeders. These are critical differentiators of a community microgrid. They cover an entire grid area, targeted grid area, and they rely on existing distribution feeders, which essentially, are the power lines. And they need to still be able to access those feeders when islanded. Community microgrids typically include both front of meter and behind the meter resources, including solar microgrids. Solar microgrids which are behind the meter, can be part of a community microgrid, and they should be. Community microgrids require effective participation from utilities, which have mostly erected barriers up to this point in time. So this is a huge market segment, and we need the utilities to come along, and at least we need the policymakers to come along to force the utilities to come along. So just to kind of point out that the distribution grid, this is a picture of the entire grid. You've got the high voltage transmission grid, and then that comes into a distribution substation or a transmission to distribution substation, and then you've got the distribution grid. If you look outside, you see steel power towers. That's probably transmission grid. If you see wood power poles, it's probably distribution grid. Those are pretty good rules of thumb. In California, there's a very, very bright line differentiation between the transmission grid and the distribution grid. And that bright line happens at 70 kilovolts, is pretty typical across the state of California. If you're at 69 kV or below, you are on the distribution grid. You are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. You get a rate return on equity that is determined by the California Energy Commission, and it's 8%. If you're on the transmission system, if you're at 70 kV or above, then you are on the transmission grid. You're regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and you get a guaranteed rate of return of around 12%. It's just ungodly the type of return that is made on transmission assets. And that is one of the reasons that the utilities fight like hell to not have a bunch of distributed energy resources, because the more energy you get locally, the less you're going to get in remote places, which means you're going to need less transmission investments. The Goleta load pocket, which is the Santa Barbara region in California, is a perfect opportunity for a comprehensive community microgrid. Clean Coalition, along with Scale Microgrids and others, are really focused on a long-term opportunity to realize what we call the Goleta load pocket community microgrid. It's a 70-mile stretch of coastline, comes in from this 40-mile long transmission line, which is shown in the purple trace here. That is a single transmission route. It's got two lines, but they're on exactly the same transmission tower. So one of those lines go down, both go down. Essentially, the Santa Barbara region is like in a Lahaina type of situation. This is super transmission grid vulnerable, and the Clean Coalition has designed a community microgrid for this entire region to make sure that we are 100% resilient to those transmission lines going down. This is just showing that that transmission line goes through the extreme fire risk. Like the whole line is runs through extreme fire risk, extreme earthquake risk, extreme landslide risk, pretty much every risk you can imagine. And Southern California Edison, which owns the distribution grid around here, they have said that transmission line goes down, will continue to go down, and could be down for months at a time if depending on what the disaster is that brings it down. This is a area of the Goleta load pocket. Just providing a little example here, it includes UCSB. That Goleta substation I mentioned is up the hill up here. There's a lot of critical assets inside of here. That you got UCSB, you've got the airport, we got the primary commercial industrial area of the Santa Barbara region is here. This is a block diagram of the very first incarnation of the Goleta load pocket community microgrid that the Clean Coalition aims to make happen. And just want to point out a couple things on this chart. One is that the little pink plus signs, those are what are called grid isolation switches. So those are switches that can open up and island everything downstream from those grid isolation switches. So there's multiple layers of islanding that can happen in the Goleta load pocket community microgrid design. I also want to point out that the blue plus signs, those are customer meters, and wherever you have a smart meter, which is pretty much everywhere in California, you can remotely turn on and off a customer meter. And then when a customer meter is turned off, then if you have a solar microgrid there, like we do at the high schools that are here in the Goleta load pocket, and lots of other facilities have solar microgrids, then they can island in the solar microgrid mode and have extra layers of resilience. The last thing I want to point out here is that we have some very large energy storage projects here. We've got this grid store battery energy storage project is 240 megawatt hours. That is an operating BESS. It's been operating now for over a year. We also have, now that BESS unfortunately is not configured for resilience. So it cannot do grid, it's not configured for grid forming and black start. We have another battery project that is going to be coming to Santa Barbara or to this region called the Green Bark BESS. And that project is the folks who own it, and you might hear more about this later in the discussion. The folks who own the Green Bark are definitely interested in making sure that it is configured to provide resilience. They just need to make sure that there's an opportunity to get compensated for the extra cost of providing inverters attached to that battery that can provide the grid forming and black start capability. It's not a huge increment in terms of cost, but there is an increment, and obviously battery owners are not in the business of giving away margin, unless they're getting compensated for it. Well, if they get compensated for it, they don't have to give away the margin. They're actually getting compensated for that extra cost and the extra value, obviously, that comes with providing resilience. As I said, the Clean Coalition has established the Community Microgrid initiative back in 2010. This is the link to the website, and I'm just gonna, you all will have this ability to download this deck, and you'll be able to, or you can just go to the Clean Coalition and Google Community Microgrid initiative. You'll find it, but this is the link to it for lots more information. The Clean Coalition has worked on over a dozen community microgrid projects since 2010. I'm happy to say that the pace of opportunities is accelerating, and this is a list of the dozen or so projects that we've been involved in. The ones that are bolded are either online or they have significantly realized their potential through lots of battery deployments and or solar microgrids in those particular places. The stakeholders that are involved in community microgrid projects, there's a lot of them. And this is a list of the 8 primary stakeholders. The utilities are highlighted in yellow for a reason. They are absolutely necessary if you're going to get a community microgrid done, because as I said, you have to rely on existing feeders, and guess who owns and controls the existing feeders? The utilities. So the utilities have to be active participants for community microgrids to be successful. And as I had mentioned up front, the utilities have mostly been resistant to going the community microgrid route so far, but because they are so compelling in the form, in terms of economic, environmental, and resilience benefits, I really see no alternative but for policymakers to make sure that community microgrids and the tremendous market segment that they represent is realized, and will eventually force the utilities to move in full force with community microgrids if they don't proactively do so. The value of resilience is really significant. The Clean Coalition has a methodology that we've developed to normalize value resilience across all geographies and types of facilities. Don't have time to get into the details of it, but again, I'm providing the link to get to the key details here. We also have a concept that we have, or a market mechanism that we've developed called a resilient energy subscription. It takes the value of resilience and takes it beyond just tiering loads, and also tiers facilities. So like a hospital, it's a tier 1 facility, and keeping the key equipment on at the hospital, those are tier 1 loads, right? So that's up here in this dark green segment. And community microgrids should always make sure that they can keep the tier 1 loads at tier 1 facilities on forever. And because those tier 1 loads at tier 1 facilities serve all community members, they should, the community microgrids that at least serve those loads and facilities should be paid for by the public, whether through ratepayers or taxpayers. The public should be paying for that. It's a benefit to everybody. There's a link here to learn more about the resilient energy subscription market mechanism. And I'm going to leave it at that to get to a couple of community microgrid examples that the Clean Coalition is currently focused on. The first one is the Tamales West Community Microgrid. This is up in Marin County, California. It will keep on a number of critical community facilities, and you can see these these pink plus signs. These are the grid isolation switches. So when the broader grid goes down, those switches all open up, and the area that's shown here is all islanded together and will be kept online through about 300 kilowatts of solar and about 1,300 kilowatt hours of energy storage. Those are going to be located at a school site. It's a school surplus site where the buses are parked, and the buses will hopefully get electrified through this process as well. We've got a fire station, multiple emergency sheltering sites, and we've got a critical water pump that are all those are the critical community facilities that are in this region. And we've got several dozen additional customers that will benefit from the resilience, and they just get kind of a free ride. They weren't targeted for resilience, but they're within this grid area. So they will be provisioned with resilience, and the level of resilience is a minimum on the worst case sequence of days when the solar is really scarce, a minimum of 4 full days of resilience, and nobody has to change any behavior. There's no load management in that 4-day stretch. For most of the year, we'll be able to keep these loads on in this entire grid, community microgrid bounded area online indefinitely. For months at a time, and but on that worst 4-day stretch, we can keep it on for 4 days guaranteed. This is that school site I mentioned where the solar will be located. This is a line diagram of the site, and I will just mention here that this is a preliminary design pending PG&E approval. This project, the Tamales West Community Microgrid, has made it through to the short list for getting funding. We're in contract negotiation with PG&E to actually get the funding to pay for this entire project, and we're in a very strong position to get that. But PG&E asked that this note be put onto this single line diagram. I'm going to quickly talk about the East LA Community Microgrid. This is a layout of it. It includes a hospital, a civic center, and a library. Those are the 3 facilities that are lined up here. It also includes an MTA, a Metropolitan Transit Authority light rail station, which is across. This is a major thoroughfare here at the bottom of the picture, and there's a big MTA station right along the street. And then we've got solar on top of all 3 of those facilities I just mentioned, plus we've got solar covering a surface parking lot, plus we've got solar covering a parking structure up here at the top of the image. And all of these assets and facilities will be tied together and be provisioned with the same type of resilience I was talking about before. This is a tremendous project in the middle of a very disadvantaged area of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles region. So the last project I'm going to touch on here is the Kapalama Container Terminal Community Microgrid. This is under construction. It should be online by the end of this year. This boundary that's shown here, that's the site. It has 10 different meters on it. It's served by a dedicated substation to the utility. The utility is HECO. This will be the very first community microgrid that HECO is in the process of approving. This is a single line diagram of it. Again, HECO, it's pending HECO approval, but we will have electric cranes. It's 100% electric, this whole terminal. Electric cranes, electric drayage vehicles. We've got enough solar siting potential to put 7 megawatts of solar on the site, and it will have something on the order of 30 megawatt hours of energy storage. And some of the storage will be front of meter. Some of these assets will be front of meter. Some of them will be behind the meter. But at the end of the day, this is what we refer to as the KCT Community Microgrid. And with that, I think I'm over time. I'm going to hand it back to Haley.
Right, and I'm going to hand it over to Ben. So there's Ben.
Great, thank you. Okay. Just making sure that my screen is visible. I believe it is. Okay, so
Yes.
I'm going to be discussing community microgrid development pathways in California. Craig did a great job of showing a lot of the unique projects that the Clean Coalition is working on. But one of the important things is ensuring that there are standard development pathways to ensure that a community microgrid is deployable anywhere, that the widespread deployment of community microgrids is feasible. So there are two programs in California that I'll be discussing. One is the Microgrid Incentive Program, or the MIP, and the other is more of a tariff that's a framework. It's called the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff. First, I just want to take a moment to appreciate how challenging and complicated community microgrids are. This is what PG&E has listed as the steps for developing a community microgrid under the Microgrid Incentive Program. There are 4 steps before the microgrid is operational: consultation, the actual application and scoring, which is done on PG&E's side, the most complicated being the initial studies for interconnection, and then studying the microgrid as a whole, and then finally development. And this is a multi-year process, potentially taking upwards of 3 to 4 years. The main takeaway is that having success is critical. For having certainty, is critical for successful community microgrid deployments, and that includes promoting process design and cost certainty. Promoting process certainty looks like ensuring that every step has a very clear timeline, or that there is streamlined interconnection and static timelines for that interconnection. Design certainty could be more on the technical side of things, something along the lines of where are the grid isolation switches being placed? Can they be placed on the low voltage side of a transformer, which is likely to be more efficient from a cost perspective? And then cost certainty is what is the actual cost of the equipment that's being used, especially on the grid side of things. For Rule 21 interconnections, the utilities offer a unit cost guide, which provides a clear estimate of what each piece of equipment is going to cost. And that at least helps a developer upfront understand what they are getting into, given a specific community microgrid design. Okay, so the Microgrid Incentive Program, here we go. The Microgrid Incentive Program offers $200 million for community microgrids at critical facilities, a significant amount of funding for each of the utilities, and specifically it covers up to $14 million per project for design and engineering, and $1 million to reimburse interconnection costs. Technically that's true, although practically projects are unlikely to receive that much money, and I'll kind of explain why that is a little bit later. The funding is only eligible for front of the meter assets, and so designs tend to front load or size the generation and storage as large as possible on the front of the meter side to maximize that funding. And behind the meter assets can be included in the community microgrids. They just will not receive any of that MIP funding. There are a number of criteria for eligibility, and that can be seen in the image below. It has to be a site that is vulnerable to an outage, a disadvantaged community, meaning a DAC or DVC, which are slightly different, a tribal community or a rural area, and then there are technical eligibility criteria. The only one that I'd like to highlight is just that the microgrid must be designed to serve the load for at least 24 hours. And each of the utilities has gone through, is in the process of completing their first application window. But given the amount of funding, there is guaranteed to be another round of eligibility, or another round where the applications are open. SCE has announced that they will open their second application window from August to November of this year, and the other 2 utilities have not made an announcement yet. And so earlier I mentioned, projects are not likely to receive that total of $15 million, and that's because the CPUC passed a rule that says that the funding is intended to be used for as many projects as possible. And so the scoring is divided by the total amount of funding that the projects receive. And that just means that the more funding a project receives, the lower the total score is and the less likely it will be to be selected. While understandable to maximize those program dollars, the unintended consequence is that larger projects that serve more critical facilities and more customers are less likely to be selected than smaller projects that really hit those minimum numbers. Next is the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff. This is the framework that is created to connect and study community microgrids. It includes both the technical microgrid islanding study as well as the legal construct, the Microgrid Operations Agreement. And this was adopted for all 3 utilities and should be in place later this year. Initially, it was a PG&E construct based on the lessons learned from the Redwood Coast Airport microgrid. And as it was adopted by the CPUC, a number of important changes were made. The first is that there is no longer any sizing restriction, where there was initially a 20 megawatt size limit. So Craig discussed a Goleta load pocket community microgrid that spans an entire distribution grid area. Now, from an eligibility standpoint, deploying such a microgrid is technically possible. In addition, the microgrid can be deployed on distribution circuits of any voltage, and we support upfront application fees. The CPUC approved a standard application fee of $75,000 for that microgrid islanding study, which is a good way to increase developer certainty. And so this is a really big step forward in adding to what the MIP started, where the MIP begins with disadvantaged communities. This CMET enables community microgrid deployments anywhere in the IOU service territories, at least theoretically. However, we do think that there are a number of shortcomings, the main one being that the CMET treats a community microgrid as a collection of individual resources rather than a single controllable asset. And this is understandable through a few different examples. The first is that a community microgrid is only able to island when the grid goes down or in black sky conditions, meaning that it is unable to provide additional value during everyday market conditions. And in addition, there is no compensation provided for that resilience value or any other value, whether that is, reducing ignition points in a high fire threat district, reducing the use of the transmission grid, potentially reducing the system peak. These are not compensated value streams. And that's unfortunate because a community microgrid adds costs for the hardware and software and grid upgrades compared to just generation or storage resources. But if there's no compensation for those additional costs and the value provided, then it puts community microgrid owner operators or communities interested in them in a difficult position. And then interconnection timelines are going to make or break these projects. And this is generally true with all front of the meter programs that the CPUC has passed. And frankly, it is part of the reason why most of these programs have been unsuccessful. Individual resources must go through an interconnection process like the utilities, the CAISO tariff or the utilities wholesale distribution access tariff before being studied collectively as a community microgrid. And given that these front of the meter interconnections can take a long time, the slowest resource is going to determine the pathway for the entire microgrid. Second, as I mentioned, there's no compensation, and so the CMET is really agnostic in terms of financing. Most existing community microgrids are feasible due to grants, but ideally, we want community microgrids that are deployable based on their own value and are not just one-offs. The CPUC chose to punt on this issue. And then finally, there's no technical assistance that is offered to disadvantaged communities. The MIP offered $25,000 for disadvantaged communities. The CMET does no such thing. And community microgrids are complicated. It takes upfront design. It takes upfront contracts with developers to even prepare an application. And a disadvantaged community typically does not have an abundance of resources, making it rather unlikely that they will go through the burden of actually creating an application. And then just finally, I want to discuss the Clean Coalition's Resilient Energy Subscription, because this does address that third piece of financing. So we have webinars and articles on this, so I'm really only going to introduce it briefly here. But this takes the construct of a community microgrid, which is seen as a single deployment surrounding critical facilities, and changes the way we think about it to a scalable, growing deployment over time. And this is done through first establishing the community microgrid and then enhancing the resilience offerings within that initial microgrid footprint to additional facilities and additional loads. And then eventually, as there is more interest surrounding the microgrid, expanding it with additional generation and storage to provide resilience to a broader number of folks. So the RES is a fee-based market mechanism. It allows any facility to subscribe based on $1 per kilowatt hour fee for the amount of resilience that they desire. So during a grid outage, the community microgrid operator will guarantee that the facility will receive the amount of clean renewable energy that they subscribe for. And effectively, that allows every facility to determine what amount of resilience they need. For the owner perspective, the owner operator perspective, the microgrid owner is able to recover both the cost of service as well as an appropriate rate of return. And so the CPUC described this proposal as novel and really unique compared to all of the other compensation frameworks that were proposed. And this really does address that missing piece. If the MIP addresses funding for disadvantaged communities, and the CMET creates a broad framework for microgrid deployments anywhere, the RES addresses the financing piece and ensures that any community has the ability to recover those costs and go through the process fully of deploying a community microgrid that is a livable asset that can continue to meet additional loads and provide resilience over time. So with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Haley.
All right, take it away, Tim.
All right, what is up, everyone? All right, so first off, thanks to Craig and Ben and the whole Clean Coalition team for having me. These folks are some of the smartest people in the game right now, and every time I hear them speak, I learn a ton. But the primary reason I'm here, and I think a lot of you are here, is because one of the most innovative energy projects in the world is happening in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we're so lucky to have one of the leaders of that project with us today. And I'm so excited to learn more about that, so I'm going to be quick here. Before I turn it over to Missy, what I want to do is provide a little bit of macro context, because when I say this is one of the most important energy projects in the world, I want you all to understand why I think that. So look, at a high level, I think there are three trends that are kind of defining the future of the energy landscape. The first is that electricity, affordable access to electricity, has become a basic human right in 21st century America. I learned this during Hurricane Sandy. So in Hurricane Sandy, I'm from New Jersey and I was living in New Jersey. And when Hurricane Sandy was coming, my whole family got together in my grandmother's house. And when the power went out, my 80-year-old grandmother thought it was cozy, and my 8-year-old nephew thought it was Armageddon. And so, you know, the reality of the situation is that everything about our life, everything about sort of the modern existence in society is dependent upon having reliable, resilient, affordable access to electricity. And one of our goals as an industry should be to make sure that happens for as many people as humanly possible. The second big trend that's going to define the future of the energy landscape is climate change, right? Which, despite what people say, remains a very, very real thing. The planet is warming, extreme weather events are becoming a lot more frequent. The economic costs of those extreme weather events are becoming, frankly, unsustainable, as evidenced by the $250 billion of economic damage that happened in LA a month ago. And so climate change is a really real thing. And what we need to do is develop an electricity system that is designed to withstand the forces that climate change puts on the system. And then the third trend that's going to define the future of the energy landscape is AI, which is also, I think, very, very real, although I'm learning a lot about this in real time. And so it is very likely that the national security of our country is going to be dependent on winning the AI wars, and electricity is AI food. So essentially, if you put these three trends together, providing affordable, reliable electricity to Americans has never been more important than it is today. But the two defining macro trends, climate change and AI, make it harder to deliver affordable, reliable electricity to people than it's ever been. And that creates a daunting challenge. And so the good news is that this is America. And despite all of our problems, when we want to be, we're still pretty good at innovation. And so the question is, given these big macro trends, how are we going to innovate the electricity system to make sure that America wins and that, you know, the people of this country get access to the cheapest, most affordable, most sustainable, most just electricity system possible? So the first thing that you do when you're trying to solve a daunting task like this is you look at the tools in your toolkit. And the good news is that solar and batteries are the defining technologies of our time, and they're getting really, really, really cheap. And so renewable electricity, just to give you guys, like, put this in context, 70% of all the capacity added to the US electric grid last year was solar. 85% of all the capacity was renewable energy. And that is not primarily because of government policy, that is primarily because of economics, as evidenced by the fact that the biggest solar market in the world right now is the great state of Texas. And so we have these tools, we have cheap, affordable, renewable electricity. But the real innovation that's happening in the energy sector right now is bottom-up engineering. And so for 100 years since the electric grid first became a commercially viable product, we've thought about adding capacity to the electric grid from a top-down standpoint. We build really big power plants, and we connect those big power plants to load via this complex network of transmission and distribution lines that Craig mentioned earlier. That's not how it's going to work in the future. How it's going to work in the future is that how we add capacity to the electric grid is going to be a combination of top-down and also bottom-up engineering, meaning that you start adding capacity at the source, and then what you use top-down load for is just kind of filling in the gaps. And we're at the very beginning stages of making that transition as an industry. And so, you know, what we need is innovative reference projects to actually get built so we can look at them and we can learn from them. And as I mentioned at the top, one of the most innovative projects in the world today is the sustainable, I'm gonna mess this up, so I wrote this down, the Sustainable Energy Utility, or the SEU concept that's been developed in Ann Arbor. So I'm so excited to hear more about that. And I think with that background, I'll turn it over to Missy, who can tell us all about that project.
Hey, thanks, Tim. That was amazing, and I hope that I don't disappoint. So game on in 1 second. Let me just get my screen up and ready for you all. And thanks to the Clean Coalition for the opportunity to be here today. So I'm going to talk to you a little about the SEU, our Sustainable Energy Utility, which is coming soon. And this is 100% clean, reliable, resilient, locally built, and community-owned power. So let's talk about it. I'm gonna just break this down into 3 sections for you all today, a little context about why and how we got here, what the vision is, and kind of where we are in that journey. So welcome to Ann Arbor. I'm sitting in Ann Arbor. We are on the land of the contemporary and historic land of the Anishinaabe and Wyandot peoples. And that's a really important thing to understand. Ann Arbor is a place that is beautiful and wonderful and extraordinary, and a very strong sense of place exists in our community. One of the values that our community holds pretty tightly is sustainability. It's part of the identity. The very first Earth Day was celebrated in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We have the first nonprofit community-led recycling program in the entire country. There's a lot of firsts that come out of here, and this is just part of what we do. So of course, as we move forward, it's important to understand we've got this goal. It's the last bullet point here. Our community set the goal of being carbon neutral in a just and equitable way by the year 2030, and it's known as A20, and that is community-wide. We know it's aggressive, audacious, and it's scientifically necessary. So game on, that's what we're working towards. So of course we do greenhouse gas inventories to understand the portfolio. For us, we look a little different than the national averages. Our largest source of emissions are coming from our built environment by far, right? Almost 70% of our emissions are coming from how we heat, cool, light, etc., our physical building space. Transportation is a smaller but growing element of that. But of course, we're electrifying. We're electrifying our vehicles faster than anywhere else in the state of Michigan. So we're pushing more and more things onto that electric system. And you can see the breakdown here. What is true, of course, because we're a conscious, environmentally conscious place, we do run solar programs. We just hit 5% of residential households in Ann Arbor have solar. When I started at the city in 2018, it was 0.01%. So we've seen this huge growth in solar adoption. Last year alone, about 40% of all solar adopters also got a battery, because our grid is pretty damn unreliable. And so people are making these investments. So we fight in lots of different ways to change this portfolio. And one of the things we do is fight at the state level. And at the end of, I don't know what time is. It's an artificial human construct. At some point in the last time, we fought and were successful in working with a bunch of other advocates to get the state to adopt an updated kind of renewable goal for our utilities. So when we started this work, we were looking at closing a pretty significant gap, that gray area, 81% of our energy, we needed to figure out how to move to renewables. Fast forward, we've got our utilities making bigger commitments because they had to, thank you, State of Michigan, the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor Public Schools making commitments. And so the gap we're trying to close is still big, but it is not where it was. It didn't feel quite as Herculean. Some other things to note that are really unique to Ann Arbor. We have what's known as, sorry, I'm just gonna close something real quick, a pre-Foot Act franchise. So in a lot of communities, you hear talk about negotiating their franchises, their electric franchise, their heating franchise. Our electric franchise has been ruled by the courts as in perpetuity. So I can't just go negotiate a new franchise in the way that Minneapolis is doing right now, or Eugene is doing. But what is also true is the Michigan Constitution preserves the rights of local governments, well, in particular cities and villages, this is what's called out, to start their own utility. So that could be a traditional municipalization effort where you buy all the infrastructure that's outside. But as Tim talked about, I think that's probably the utility of the past and not the utility of the future. It also allows you to start your own utility that is pretty silent on what that looks like. And historically, this wouldn't have made sense, right? I wouldn't have stood up a new utility 20 years ago and have parallel poles and wires running down the street doing the exact same thing our IOUs are doing because the economics won't pencil. But thanks to DERs, well, they do. And so we started to ask, what is it that we're actually looking to do? We're looking to increase reliability because we have a pretty unreliable system. We're looking to increase resilience because climate change is here and now, and we're already experiencing the impacts. So how do we help provide critical load in times of disruption? We want it to be clean, of course, with our clean energy goals. We want it to be affordable. And so we started to ask, what does that look like? And that is how we got to this idea of a sustainable energy utility. So this is a community-owned utility that would provide reliable, resilient electricity from local solar and energy storage systems installed on participating homes and businesses. So starting with behind-the-meter systems. It's focusing on generation. The goal is not to own the grid, for us at least. The goal is clean energy, reliable energy, powering our lives, right? We want healthy energy in our system. And we want to be able to invest in our community as we do that. This is a supplemental utility, which means no one has to take service, but everyone can take service. And it's rate-based. So the services you take indicate what your rate is. So if I take solar and storage, I'm paying for solar and storage rates. If I take the geothermal offering, I'm paying for the geothermal offering. If I just take energy efficiency services, I'm just paying for those services. So it's very customized. And if I take no service, I pay zero because I'm not taking service. So this is not a kick out of incumbent utility. This is a supplemental. So it's first in the SEU, the way it's designed. You're getting your energy directly from the SEU. And if you need more, you're still actually able to pull from the grid. And I think Tim described this beautifully. It's kind of like the bottom up and the top down. So instead of it being all top down IOU power with like a little sprinkling of some generation, we're sort of flipping it. Where first in is this SEU that's providing kind of critical load, if you will. And then you've got top down sprinkling over the top. And of course, with our goals, this is going to reduce emissions, right, significantly. We're able to deal with energy poverty issues and access issues because the market doesn't open up these services to everyone. So by this being a city utility, we're able to make sure everyone has the ability to participate. You don't have to have $25,000 up front to go get a solar installation. All you have to do is sign up for the utility and you pay your bill like you do today. It just happens to be that bill is charging you for clean energy that's coming from your roof, and initial modeling shows we can do that cheaper. So here are some of the services the SEU will provide. Now we have designed the SEU to phase. There are some exceptions here because we've been successful in securing some grant funding to kind of test out those future phases. This is really important because the technologies, you don't want to install a hardware that has to change when you get to phase 2. So we're trying to do pilots of later phases so we can make sure everything seamlessly, well, that's ambitious, as much as is possible can seamlessly kind of move through the various phases of the SEU. So day 1, solar and storage, it's bread and butter. Behind the meter systems, just like I have on my house right now, I have solar and storage. We know how to connect those, we know how to do that. Difference here, utility owns it, right? So no one has to put that capital outlay. You pay for units of production. If you have excess generation, you are selling that back onto the grid through the existing poles and wires of our investor-owned utility. We are trying not to have you overgenerate in those times, hence why we are encouraging folks to invest in batteries where that makes sense through the SEU. But you could, right? You could choose to do that. Different economics if you want to overgenerate. We also will be doing support for electrification. We did win a US Department of Energy grant to install a network geothermal system to cover 100 homes in one of our low-income areas. We've designed the system actually for 262 homes. You know, it's a moment with federal funding, so we are waiting to see what happens, but we have the award in name, but hopefully we'll be doing, this is our first design and actual implementation of heating and cooling solutions for a cold climate. We also have the highest electric rates in the country, and so if I just move people to cold climate air source heat pumps, I'm going to increase their energy burden. It just is. We've done the modeling, we've tried really, really hard. The way you avoid that is deep energy efficiency work with your beneficial electrification, or we start looking at geo as a solution. So this is our first foray. We also right now have a contractor who's helping us study geothermal potential for the whole city, figuring out what other areas we would move forward after our initial pilot. The SEU can do energy waste reduction, right? We got to, best energy is energy we don't use in space, and most of us don't want to be paying bills for things that we're not using. So anything we can do around energy efficiency is important. And then here, we're talking about it today, microgrids. So while I told you the first phase is behind the meter systems, the goal is actually that we're setting up small scale neighborhood microgrids, and I'm not sure microgrids is even the right term because we're not confident we're actually going to push back to the grid. We might actually just build some parallel infrastructure. So this is an area of deep investigation for us to figure out what economically and technically makes the most sense. But first phase, SEU comes online. We have 900 people who subscribe. I subscribe, the closest person to me that subscribes is a quarter of a mile away. So I have a behind the meter system. Power goes out and the centralized grid, I still have power. My neighbor's like, hey, why do you have power? We start having a conversation. They realize I'm an SEU subscriber. Suddenly they want to sign up. So all of a sudden, my neighbors through behavior change theory come on board and subscribe to the SEU. Now I can start talking about building that microgrid because I have the tight geographical footprint that's necessary to run small scale, very small poles and wires between that network. Think 20 homes, maybe 30 homes connected, or maybe an anchor of a school with the home kind of the homes around them spidering out, if you will, connected. So the goal is that we're actually building a lot of these kind of microgrid-like structures throughout the community. So again, if something bad happens somewhere on the system, they're still okay because they still at least have critical load provided through the SEU. There's more here, but those are kind of the big offerings we'll talk about. So where are we and what do we need to do to get started? So we are, the voters, spoiler, the voters authorized this. So we've been studying this for a while. Here in Ann Arbor, we were looking at community choice aggregation. We were trying to get the state to move. We had studied municipalization and decided that really isn't a climate strategy for us because of the aggressiveness of our timeline. And so in all of these conversations, we sort of said, well, wait a minute, CCA 3.0 really is about local generation. What if we just kind of like do it? And that's part of the genesis story of the SEU. So the voters, we took this to the voters, 79% voted to authorize creation of the SEU in November. So here we are. We are rounding out month 3 of starting the work. We've amended the city charter, so the SEU exists on paper. It's a real thing. We are in the process. We brought in some consultants to help us with some of the technical elements, some people who understand our billing systems to kind of help us think about how things will be structured. As we look ahead to 3 to 6 months, we are about to put out the job description for our executive director. So if anyone is really excited or you know of good candidates, I would love those names so I can pass them on to our search firm. We need an innovator. We need someone who sees potential in something that hasn't been done before. Nothing the SEU is doing is unique, right? Utilities offer these services. Independent contractors offer these services. What is unique is we're offering all of them and only them. So we need someone who's creative in that landscape. We also are doing the engagement with our residents, making sure people are aware. There's a lot of legal work and technical work, regulatory work that we're moving forward with as we speak, and working on the billing and the customer service elements, right? How does this tack on? Can we use our existing billing software for our water department, for our stormwater department? And so we're exploring what we might be able to do there. And you'll see how we move out. And not too long, we'll be in the technical specs. We'll be doing the diagrams, right, that we need to do. I need to let a contract for contractors to come in because we almost certainly will not hire solar and energy storage contractors as full-time staff because those systems don't need a lot of work once they're up and operational. We'll probably be using the private marketplace, but they better know exactly what I want, and I better have those specs fully designed so everything in the SEU is connected beautifully and seamlessly. Our goal, what we're telling the public, is we hope to launch 18 months from when voters authorized the SEU. Of course, everyone wanted us to start yesterday. So we are trying to be as thoughtful, move as fast as we can, but being very thoughtful and intentional so that when we do launch, it is successful and we're not kind of pulling back on the things we haven't thought about. So this is kind of an overview of where we are in process. Last few things to share with you as I close out here. We know that for the SEU to succeed in practice, it has to be cost competitive with things like private solar and existing utility rates. We've done a rate model, a pretty conservative rate model, and we show that we are, that we can come in. Now, our landscape is evolving and changing, so we'll be figuring things out, but we feel really good there. But we know with solar and storage, you're not competing with existing utility rates because storage is so much more, right? You're talking about reliability and resilience in that system. And so the cost comparison we make is with generators. And so we need to know that, and of course we all know, I'll just say this, you know this, a battery is so much more than a generator. We can do just significantly more with that asset, but that's the thing that most people can kind of wrap their heads around in initial conversations. And the good news is we do come in cheaper when you consider purchasing a generator and what the cost would be over the life of that battery. The things that we're paying a lot of attention to, the SEU's success will depend on 2 variables that are in relationship with each other for starting, not for long term. For starting, it's going to be adoption. So we need to have a certain number of people subscribe or a certain number of load. That's a better way to think about it, subscribe, which makes sense, right? You've got base fees, you've got a billing system you have to pay for. If you only have one person, that you can't cover all of those costs. So you need to have enough usage in there so you can amortize that over the base. The second is the cost of capital. The utility doesn't exist. Right. Normally in utilities, you can take on debt based on your revenue estimates. Well, we don't have a historical revenue track record because we didn't exist. And so we're working with some creative financing solutions here to launch the SEU. And then once it's established and it's got revenue, you're in traditional markets and it's pretty simple. But these are some of the things that I'm the sustainability director for the city of Ann Arbor. I am not our CFO, but I am learning a lot of things about how to set this up. So this is one of those times I think we all know intimately where you come up with a good idea and then it becomes yours. So figuring all of this out. The other things we're spending a lot of time with, when you don't communicate with people, they fill the space with their own stories about how things are going. So being very intentional right now in setting up community engagement, expectation management. We're sending bi-weekly updates on how things are going. It's just simple 1 page designed in Canva just to let people know we see you and here's how we're developing. Come and give us feedback when it's relevant. and making them understand that their government is actually working still for them in a time when that can feel really questionable. Of course, fundraising, financing, there's some misinformation that's circulating. And so a not insignificant portion of my job is kind of redirecting that misinformation and getting fact-based information out. And then we haven't even started recruiting for the SEU. We have a passive wait list because people are excited. And so they can sign up on our website just to get alerted when the SEU is ready to do their own home assessment and figure out what services make sense for them. Right now, we have just shy of 900 different subscribers already with no advertising, which doesn't feel like a lot, but also feels like a lot when I haven't advertised a thing at all. These are just people who are paying attention. And there's a lot to pay attention to in the world right now. So I'm sort of surprised we even have that. But that is what we are working on. And all of this is the continuing. I'm in active conversations around initial financing for the SEU. Think somewhere 25 to 50 million for SLET that will probably take on to just get infrastructure moving and going. We go to city council with the ordinance that creates the governance structure and the bylaws that kind of protect and how the SEU operates. That goes on March 17th for its first reading. So hopefully come beginning of April, the SEU will exist on paper and it will have content in its box, which is really, really great. We're going to be hiring that ED in somewhere between 2 to 3 months. We'll have someone who's accepted, probably not but in seat. My guess is it'll be another month before that. And we're finalizing a comprehensive plan that talks about what the 5-year strategy is for the SEU, those phases. How do we know that we're ready to move into microgrid? How do we know that we're ready to move into network geothermal? What do you even rate base on geothermal? It's an active question in the field right now. So there's a lot of things moving, but we'll have that comprehensive plan that folks can kind of sink their teeth into and say, if they're really interested in thermal, this is when it's going to be coming, or this is how we'll be making a decision that we're bringing a new service to your part of the city. There's no right answer in any of this, but we want to be as transparent and thoughtful as we can as we're rolling out the utility. So I know this was whirlwind. I have slides at the end. I want to get to questions that talk about the different use cases. So if anyone is curious, I can talk about what does it look like if you already have solar? What services could you take? What does it look like if you don't have solar potential? But for now, I would just say if you're curious and staying up to date, we are moving fast and furiously and very intentionally. You can check out this website, a2gov.org/A2SEU. We're trying to keep it updated. And with that, I think I will stop and turn it back so we can get some questions from all of you.
Great, thank you so much, Missy. We're going to go into our Q&A section right now, and this Q&A section will apply to all of our speakers from today. So first off, we do have a few questions for Craig regarding the Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid. I have several here, so I'll just go down the list and then I'll give you a chance to talk. So from Stephanie Wayland, she is the load flexibility lead at the CEC. She asks, how much is SCE charging for operating this microgrid? Who owns this microgrid and who operates these microgrids? An additional question on that topic from Sophie. I'm so sorry, I can't pronounce your last name. Sophie Tongzopit, Senior Strategic Business Planner at SMUD. She asks, among these community microgrids, which one requires upgrades on the utility side? And then finally, one more from Alice Sung, Principal at Greenbark Associates. Is the Goleta Pocket Microgrid planned or designed to a capacity for the complete decarbonization of the public buildings, at least if not including all of the residential and private commercial properties? Or if not, how much more feasibility studies would that take to achieve a more fully zero carbon microgrid community? So I'll pass those questions off to Craig.
Excellent, excellent. There was a lot of questions there. I'm going to start with the ones I can remember, and then Haley, please remind me of any that I didn't touch on.
You want me to start at the beginning and go back?
Just I think I took some notes. I'll catch what I can, and then you can just make sure I got them. And or Stephanie and the others can chime in and re-ask. But Stephanie from the CEC, great to have you on here, Stephanie, and everybody that's tuning in. The ownership and the utility upgrades and kind of like financial structures, So the ownership, the answer on the ownership is it can be anybody. It could be any party. It could be the utility. And I think the question on Stephanie's question was specific to the Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid. And the reality is that that project is, has not moved forward yet. We've pushed on Southern California Edison for the full Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid. We've pushed on them for the Montecito Community Microgrid, which is just a little, little stretch of 1 feeder out in the Montecito area of Santa Barbara. We could not get Edison to move with us. This region doesn't qualify for the microgrid incentive program that Ben detailed. We don't fit. You have to thread a needle. You have to thread like a dozen needles, right? You have to. It's not only low income, disadvantaged. You have to also be grid vulnerable, and/or rural, and/or there's literally about a dozen criteria you have to meet, and it's probably like 0.1% of California's geography fits in the MIP eligibility zone. But coming with the CMET, as Ben mentioned, the Community Microgrid Enablement Tariff, we can put these anywhere. And who can own the Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid? The answer is anybody, any party. I would say that Tim could chime in on this as well, because Tim, can I mention Greenbark? Yeah, okay. So Scale Microgrids they own the Greenbark project. They're developing the Greenbark project, which is one of those big battery systems that I had mentioned. That puts Scale Microgrids in a perfect position to own the Goleta Load Pocket Community Microgrid, right? Starting with that everything that can be served by that initial Greenbark battery energy storage project. And Scale is full of people like Tim, because Tim co-founded Scale, and he made sure it was populated with team members that are visionary like he is. But the answer, Stephanie, is anybody can own a community microgrid. There is really no restriction there. In terms of who's going to pay the utility upgrades, there are utility upgrades that are required. Those are embedded costs within the community microgrid, capital expenditure, and there's operational expenditure there too. So that all has to be captured. The Clean Coalition is going through this process right now in the microgrid enablement programs. We've submitted 4 applications into PG&E. We've submitted 1 application into Southern California Edison, and we've gotten pretty good indications that we're going to win at least one of the MIP applications with PG&E. That's Tamales West, and the Edison application in East Los Angeles. So we're right. We've had to price all this out. Our applications are in. So the amount of money that we've budgeted for everything, including grid upgrades, is set. We're not getting any extra money for that. If we under budgeted, that's going to be on us and our partners to make sure that that gets covered. But if the budgets that we submitted will get paid for through the MIP grants, and so right now it's basically the ratepayers are paying for the grid upgrades. In the future, under the CMET, that will not be the case. That those upgrade costs will have to get covered by the entity that owns the community microgrid. As Ben mentioned, and as I touched on, and as Ben went deeper into, the resilient energy subscription is a financing mechanism for community microgrids. So the RES, as we call it, the resilient energy subscription, is a viable pathway to make sure that the beneficiaries of community microgrids, the ones that are getting the resilience, are the ones who are paying for those grid upgrades and everything else, right? The solar and the storage assets, plus the grid upgrades, plus anything else, right, is paid for through the RES. At least everything beyond those critical loads at the critical facilities, which should be paid for by everybody, right? That should be spread around to all ratepayers. And then and then the folks who are not don't have critical loads, or they're not critical facilities, the people who are not critical facilities, they should pay for the resilience they're getting themselves, and they can do that through the RES, and that those RES fees allow the community microgrid to be much bigger than it otherwise would be. There was also Haley, remind me, there was a couple the decarbonization. So on decarbonization, the Clean Coalition, we're very much focused on electrification. So, I think that's probably what was meant by decarbonization. We want to see, almost every microgrid that the Clean Coalition is involved in has electric vehicle charging infrastructure designed into it. And it also has, opportunities to electrify gas loads. We want to get gas out. If you want to kind of know what the Clean Coalition is all about in this regard, check out our Green Palisades campaign, which is all about making sure that the Los Angeles, the areas destroyed by the fires in Los Angeles recently, that those get rebuilt in a super green fashion, which is all electric, net zero, and with solar microgrids levels of resilience. Haley, did I miss any? I think there was a lot there. I want to get to some other questions too, but if there's anything else really quickly that I missed completely, let me know.
Sure.
Well, Haley, while you're looking at that, I just wanted to clarify one thing. I mean, I think, to the CEC and the SMUD questions, look, community microgrids in California right now are a business model problem, right? And so, like, if you think about the Goleta load pocket, we don't have a technological barrier to building a community microgrid in Santa Barbara County, right? And so basically, like, I have conversations with SCE and I say, like, I know how to build like the generation and storage component. And they say, great, like, we know how to make the distribution system upgrades to be able to island this. But like, there's no mechanism for being compensated for resilience in California. And so then the question becomes like, who pays for this? Does this get rate based? Does this get, paid for from the private sector through a PPA type situation? There is no answer to that question in the California regulatory statutes to date. And so again, look, I think ultimately, right, we were planning on the federal government playing a role in helping us figure this out, right? So prior to November, our basic plan was like, okay, we have some business model problems. We have to work those things out. And we're going to go to the national labs and all the resources that the DOE has, and we're going to bring them in, and they're going to give us some grant money, and we're going to use that to kind of figure out how this works. That doesn't seem like a great plan anymore. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do in Santa Barbara, right, is bring the community together and figure out how we're going to get this done in the absence of federal government leadership. And look, I don't think the probability of that is, I think the probability of us being able to figure it out is pretty high. But, everyone has to come into these conversations with an open mind. And then, look, I think one of the challenges we have in California is, sometimes when the barrier to doing cool things is like a piece of paper that was written in 1995, maybe we should just tear up the piece of paper that was written in 1995 and build the coolest shit we can. But that's not exactly how it works in our great state. So we're working through it.
All right, thank you, Tim. I'm gonna move on now to another question for Missy. So this is from Sophie she's the senior strategic business planner at SMUD. Will the SEU draw electricity from the existing utility?
No, the SEU won't draw any electricity from the existing utility. Also, Tim, hell yes. If the law is broken, change the law.
Missy, I just want to mention that SMUD is the person who asked that's where Sophie is from. SMUD, that's Sacramento Municipal Utility District. They're the second largest municipal utility in California. So they're and they're very innovative. So if you want to have a cohort in California, there's probably not a better one than Sophie.
Well, and good news, I know SMUD because my previous life was working for ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and we had a high footprint in California. So great. No, game on. The SEU, I did not say this, is a municipal utility. It is just not a traditional utility. Like the poles and the wires are not the game, right? For us, at least, that's not the goal. That's the most vulnerable part of the system. We are far more interested in changing the electrons and improving reliability in the system.
And I was a little confused by the question, Missy, so maybe I could just ask in case Sophie is still wondering, kind of get her answer. I think it said, are you drawing any energy from the traditional utility? I thought that's how I interpreted the question. Isn't the SEU kind of running in parallel? So isn't the utility that the utility that runs the grid there is still owning those grid assets, and there will be energy flowing over
Yeah,
those.
so the utility
Right.
itself is not pulling anything. We are not the 24/7 power provider. We do not, like, that is, it's a supplemental utility. It is not the primary utility, right? This is part of like the beauty of this model. The resident themselves is getting utility from two, unless they choose to opt out of, well, never opt into the SEU. They can still have the IOU, or opt out of the IOU and just have the SEU. We are not advocating that at the beginning, because we got some work to do, right, to figure things out and the economics. But so the resident will have to, but the utility, no, because we don't have any requirements around the amount of load we have to serve. It's all supplemental.
Follow-up question for Missy. This is from James Dodenhoff, the principal at Silent Running LLC. Asks, how is the SEU model different from the community choice aggregation model? And then a similar question from Alice Sung, principal at Green Bank Associates, is does Ann Arbor have community choice aggregators as in California?
We do not. So CCA is not allowed in Michigan. It has to be enabled at the state, and it has not been enabled at the state. So we are actively working on CCA legislation and have been for a long time. So we are trying to open that up. So I guess that's sort of the simple, we can't. How is it similar to CCA? I actually think it's kind of like one of the next evolutions of it. It is all choice, it's all local generation, right? We're not signing up for generation outside of the community. Small scale distribution networks over time. Community solar's in play in this model. We can do things, and community solar's also not enabled in Michigan. What a gift. So come on to Michigan, everyone. We need to change the landscape. So that said, the utilities are allowed to do these things. Utilities do not want to do these things in Michigan. So by becoming a utility, even though we're a supplemental utility, we can do all of it. So we kind of get all the sweet things that we want to do that our constituents want by not being the primary load, the load serving entity, we don't have all the same restrictions. So in fact, the only thing we think we have to file to our Public Service Commission is a renewable energy plan, which always makes me laugh a little bit, because like that's just what we do. Like here you go, like here's our business plan. So that's pretty easy. So it is not a CCA in the sense, it is not, we're not aggregating choice and going to the market. We are letting individuals choose and serving that market. So it, in essence, kind of feels similar, but regulatorily does operate differently.
Gotcha. Follow-up question from Rich Brown. He asks for Missy, what is the Michigan utility law regarding sharing power over the fence between neighbors?
Well, you can't do it unless you're a utility, and then you can. And now we're a utility, so we can.
All right, I like that answer. Very simple. I'm gonna go to a quick question for Ben. Have you been following the California ISO DER Market Integration Working Group? And do you have any comments about that? That's from Stephanie Wayland.
Yes, I have been. I honestly, I don't have too many comments at this point. Our focus on that has been trying to get further value for behind the meter resources in terms of capacity, resource adequacy. That seems to be the main issue with markets nowadays, is how do you actually get that value if you are a behind the meter resource? So the market integration piece of it is important, but at the very first meeting they made a clear kind of differentiator that this is not related to resource adequacy, and they won't really be discussing it. So I am following along, but it just hasn't been a very clear priority for us because of that.
I just want to expand on that answer because the Clean Coalition is designing a feed-in tariff as we speak for San Diego Community Power. And those are for front of meter interconnections. And when you go front of meter, it's even worse to get resource adequacy assigned. So at least behind the meter, you have several pathways to potentially get some resource adequacy assigned for energy storage, or kind of a proxy to resource adequacy. But front of meter, the only way you get resource adequacy is to go through the CAISO process to get deliverability. which is a multi-year process. And then once you get deliverability, then you can maybe get resource adequacy. So if you interconnect on the top of a roof, right? Think of just a business, right, that has 100 kilowatts of solar on top of it, and energy storage attached, say 200 kilowatt hour battery. You interconnect on the utility side of the meter versus behind the meter. You know what the difference is? 2 feet. That's it. The impact on the grid is exactly the same. And if you're behind the meter, there's at least some kind of pathway to an RA compensation. Front of meter, there's none. So we need to fix that and make sure that if you just interconnect without getting deliverability, you're right on top of a load, you can still get compensation for resource adequacy. There's no better way to take care of a load than sitting right on top of it.
All right, another question from Alice LaPierre, building scientist, energy efficiency coordinator at City of Berkeley Energy Office. This is for anyone. She asks, is there a way around connecting buildings which are not on the same block? We were stopped from connecting a number of our large downtown buildings because we were not allowed to cross the urban streets. So if anyone has an...
No. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Missy said it well, right? I mean, that the way natural monopoly law works with utilities is the utilities have the exclusive right to run power between properties. And so the only entity in California that's allowed to run power lines between properties with limited exceptions, and the MIP is kind of the one, I think, limited exception to that in a pilot capacity. But with very limited exceptions, you can't do it. It's a utility thing. And one of the big questions for California, right, is if we want to build community microgrids and everyone thinks that's a good idea, and there's a lot of community support for these types of projects, you know, up and down the state, but private sector people can't do it because we can't run power lines, and utilities can't do it because they're not allowed to own generating assets. Then, like, literally, you're saying it's illegal to build community microgrids at a time when the public is saying the technology is available and we want to build these things now. And so that's ultimately why I say, like, it's a business model problem. There's nothing technically preventing anyone from doing any of this stuff. It's just like, who gets to rate base it or not rate base it? How does it get paid for? That type of stuff is all that's the barrier to getting these projects built in the state of California right now.
Gotcha. Thank you, Tim. Quick question from Shoshana, the software architect at GE Vernova. This is just a pretty quick question. Community microgrids are separate from public safety power shutoffs. That's a question, not a statement.
Public safety power shutoffs are one of the reasons that you want to have community microgrids, because when you have a public safety power shutoff, it is almost always because of high winds that are blowing, transmission lines around and have risk of sparking fires. So when that transmission line goes down, you want to be able to island your community microgrids to make sure that those, the meters that are served, the customers that are served within that bounded community microgrid bounded area, they continue to operate as normal. And then when the public safety power shutoff is off, then the rest of the customers get to come back on too. But community microgrid bounded areas will ride through the public safety power shutoffs, and even worse, like public safety power shutoffs get a lot of attention. But you know what's way worse than a public safety power shutoff is the actual disaster, like what happened in Los Angeles, where your whole transmission grid might be burned down and might not come back for months. And even worse, right, your whole community is burned down. So the public safety power shutoffs are separate from community microgrid, except for the fact that community microgrids will allow the customers within the community microgrids to stay operational as normal, even during those PSPSs.
Yeah, just one other thing I'll add to that, right? I mean, I've talked to a lot of utility engineers about this. And to be clear, right, like the decision to execute a public safety power shutoff is a nightmare, right? Because you're basically sitting there in the grid operations room and you're saying, okay, the wind's blowing and the humidity is at a certain temperature or, a certain value, like, let's turn off the power. Well, if you turn off the power, like, you're causing tons of economic damage to the community. And there are a lot of people that rely on electricity for life safety, life-saving, medical technologies and stuff like that. So it's literally like, well, if we turn the power off, we're definitely going to kill 5 people. But if we keep the power on, there's like a 10% chance that we might kill, 200 people. And that's literally the decision that utility engineers are facing when they do these public safety power shutoffs. So the benefit of community microgrids is it makes it easier for utility engineers to justify those PSPS events because there's then assets in the community that can prevent people from dying. And so they're different things, but they're very, very related. Having community microgrids enables utilities to do more public safety power shutoffs. Doing more public safety power shutoffs stops fires, and it's a really good idea for us to stop starting fires in California.
All right, well said. We only have a few minutes left, and I know these questions are kind of all over the place because we have so many speakers, and we won't get to all of them, but I will be sending these questions to our speakers after this webinar so they can get in touch if they want to respond to any of these attendee questions. Just going into the next one here for Craig or Ben. This is from Jose from the Center for Community Energy. He asks, in the microgrid program, of the 3 requirements, does a project need to meet all 3 criteria or meet one of them? That is it and or?
It's an and.
Yes.
It's an and those 3 criteria, some of them you have to meet just one, like I think it's out of 3 criteria, the first 2 you just have to meet one of the, one of the bullets. The third one you have to meet all of them. At least one of those buckets you have to meet all of the requirements. So you literally have to meet like a dozen requirements. And as I said before, very small percentage of opportunities in California, like if you just take California geography, very small, like maybe 0.1% of California's geography meets all those requirements.
And so, when we're in the actual proceeding and making this program, one of the things that we argued is that utilities really should have eligibility maps so that folks aren't having to do this research on their own and try to figure out, what is the 1% worst reliability circuit in the service territory when it's next to impossible to find that data. And the utilities really pushed hard against that, and the CPC did not require them to create those eligibility maps. And then lo and behold, once they actually started rolling out the program, the utilities realized, oh, maybe we should actually have an eligibility map. So it was one of these great things where, they of their own initiative kind of changed their mind and ended up creating these maps. But yeah, it's very clearly, meeting all of these requirements puts a big burden on the applicant to even figure out, am I eligible? And when it takes, when there's such a financial burden even associated with submitting an application, having all of these hoops to jump through, that makes it more difficult to participate is less likely to result in successful projects.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, hindsight's 2020, but neither altitude
Freezing.
Yeah, that's not just on my end, is it? Okay, looks like there's something wrong with the Wi-Fi over there. I'll just move on to another. Oh, there he is.
Craig, you're on mute and you froze for like 30 seconds.
Oh, my apologies. I said that, in hindsight, hindsight's 2020, but if can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Hindsight's 2020, but if we had community microgrids in Altadena and Pacific Palisades, neither of which qualified for the MEP, by the way, right? Those places might still be there because of what Tim had said earlier, right? If we had had community microgrids, the utilities would have been much more rational about turning off their transmission grids when the high winds came up, and those places, have a high likelihood that they would still be there, or at least would be in much better condition than they currently are, which is, pretty much, ravaged to the ground.
All right. I'll give another question here. This question is from Sam Andre. He is a new member of the Clean Coalition. He asks, Missy, has the IOU been cooperative with the establishment of the SEU, or have they gotten in the way?
Yeah, actually, it's sort of interesting. They have been pretty neutral. And I think part of that is because our grid is very old and the amount of investment that they have to make is so significant while we're also electrifying quite fast. So we're putting so much strain on the grid at a time where they don't have the resources to invest at the scale necessary, that the SEU actually is kind of like a little release valve of some of the pressure. And so we've been in conversations with them. I would say, let's not pretend they love it, but I don't think they hate it. They see some value for them. And in fact, they even agreed, we didn't win it, but we did put in a proposal together to do VPPs and to study the impact it would have on the centralized grid if the SEU was able to do a lot more VPPs and take pressure off. So kind of like your marriage, all the things.
And since we have 1 minute left, I'll ask a yes or no question for Missy from Larry Confino. He asks, is deep geothermal part of your SEU plan?
Did you say deep geothermal or just geothermal?
He said deep geothermal.
TBD.
Okay.
You said I had to do one word, but the
No,
longer
I
answer is
no.
we are working with the University of Michigan to get some test wells done to understand the economics and the cost. So to be determined.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It looks like we're at time now. So I'll send you all these questions.
Hey, Haley, can I just make one quick comment to everybody? I am just thrilled to be, collaborating with Tim. We've been collaborating for a long time with Scale Microgrids and Tim Haight personally. Missy, we're so thrilled to be collaborating with you, and I can tell from the questions that came in and the participants who have asked the questions. There's some really influential people that have been tuning into this webinar, and I'm really thrilled about that. And the Clean Coalition, we want to collaborate with you. California Energy Commission, all the other folks who chimed in, we want to collaborate with you. So please reach out between me and Ben. We want to harness this really positive energy and make community microgrids a real thing and unleash this tremendous market segment to bring economic, environmental, and resilience benefits to our communities everywhere.
Yes, and the recording and slides for this webinar will be available within 2 business days on our website, and you will receive them in your email if you're a registered attendee, which you all are because you're here. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this.